December 2025, Russian forces continue their grinding advance in the Donbas region, measured not in dramatic breakthroughs, but in incremental, territorial gains achieved at catastrophic cost. In this video, we'll examine a fundamental question that defines the current strategic landscape. Why does Russia persist in offensive operations that produce minimal territorial gains at unsustainable human cost? The answer reveals not merely tactical miscalculation, but comprehensive strategic failure. A grinding offensive that systematically destroys Russia's military institutional capacity while achieving objectives with negligible strategic value. To understand this failure, we must examine three interconnected dimensions of the current Donbas fighting. First, the tactical reality of how contemporary combat operations unfold when Russian units attack Ukrainian positions, incorporating the transformative impact of ubiquitous drone surveillance and precision fires. Second, the human cost on both sides, analysing how Russia irreversibly hollows out its military competence. Ukraine faces its own sustainability challenge that constrain strategic options. Third, the political lock that traps both belligerents in a conflict neither can abandon without catastrophic domestic consequences, making negotiated settlements far more complex than external observers typically acknowledge. This is not a static stalemate, amenable to diplomatic freezing. This is an active, strategic degradation unfolding across multiple dimensions simultaneously. A war Russia cannot win at an acceptable cost, cannot afford to sustain indefinitely, yet cannot politically afford to stop. Understanding the strategic failure of Russian offensive operations requires a precise analysis of what Russia actually captured, at what cost, and over what timeline. The Institute for the Study of War, using geolocated evidence and satellite imagery, calculated that Russian forces gained 4,168 square kilometers in 2024, predominantly consisting of agricultural land and small settlements with minimal infrastructure or population. This figure requires contextualization to understand its strategic significance. The Russian advance in 2024 was 7 times greater than the gains in 2023, when Russia captured only 487 square kilometers. However, this apparent acceleration obscures a more fundamental reality. Russian forces advanced at an average daily rate of 14 square kilometers in September 2024, compared to 1,265 square kilometers per day in March 2022, 90 times slower than the initial invasion period, when Russian mechanized columns advanced on multiple axes before Ukrainian resistance consolidated. The temporal disruption of 2024 gains reveals the intensification of Russian operations in the latter half of the year. Russian advances accelerated in August 2024, with nearly 400 square kilometers captured that month, reaching 629 square kilometers in November. December 2024 saw Russian forces capture only 583 square kilometers, suggesting either operational exhaustion or Ukrainian defensive adaptation limiting further gains. The critical, analytical question is not the quantity of territory captured, but its strategic significance. Russian forces seized 4 mid-sized settlements in all of 2024: Avdiivka, Selidove, Vuhledar, and Kurakhove, the largest of which had a pre-war population of over just 31,000 people. Each of these captures required months of sustained offensive operations with massive casualty expenditure.
Ukraine's President Zelensky has blamed the fall of Avdiivka, a key town in the east of the country, on a lack of long-range weapons. Kyiv has pulled its forces out after a lengthy battle. Russian troops have been on the offensive around Avdiivka for months.
Ukrainian troops film themselves as they withdraw from Avdiivka. Exhausted after the longest and perhaps the bloodiest battle of the war so far. Russian shells still landing close by. In the town centre, a Russian flag is raised. And another on a rooftop in one of the town's industrial areas. The Kremlin is already crowing, releasing footage of Russian fighter jets in action. Air power has played a big role in this victory. On the ground, Ukrainian forces have also been struggling with acute shortages of men and, in particular, of ammunition. The result? Ukrainian infantry fighting to hold on to Avdiivka have been heavily outgunned by as much as 10 to 1. And so, eventually, Ukraine ordered a withdrawal.
This is what the East looked like in October last year. The large section of pink shows the areas where Russia had full military control. The sections covered in stripes show some Russian control, and then the yellow patches denote more recent Russian advances. And if we look at the same map today, we can see how the front line has changed. The pink has engulfed the stripes, and those yellow sections have expanded significantly. In other words, Russian troops are advancing westwards.
Avdiivka was not just a battle in 2024. It had been a frontline stronghold since 2014. For a decade, Ukrainian forces transformed the city and its massive Soviet-era industrial complex into one of the most heavily fortified positions in the world. The final, most intensive phase of the assault lasted approximately 4 months, culminating in its fall in February 2024. During this window, Russian forces executed a grinding offensive that prioritized territorial capture over the preservation of their own combat power. Avdiivka only fell after Russia launched over 230 glide bombs at fortified positions in the short span just 48 hours. Throughout the siege, Ukrainian forces leveraged the city's defense in depth to maintain casualty ratios that substantially favored the defenders. Even as Russian forces advanced, they did so at a cost of roughly 103 casualties per square kilometre, gained in 2024, a metric driven largely by the intense fighting around Avdiivka and similar settlements. The eventual withdrawal was not a failure of the defensive line in itself, but as a result of artillery ammunition exhaustion. By early 2024, Ukrainian fire rates had declined to a critical 10 to 1 disadvantage, leaving defenders without the shells needed to disrupt Russian troop concentrations and armour.
This satellite image shows a field outside the eastern Ukrainian town of Vuhledar, littered with destroyed tanks and infantry vehicles. Ukrainian and Western officials say this is the result of a battle which has already cost Russia dozens of military vehicles and hundreds of troops since February. The coal mining town in Ukraine became a new focus of Russia's offensive due to a strategic location. From here, Ukrainian forces can target rail lines linking Russian-occupied Donetsk to the Crimean Peninsula, a major base for Moscow's operations. The Wall Street Journal analyzed videos taken within 2 miles of Vuhledar, and we spoke to British and American military experts to find out what this offensive reveals about the state of Russia's army a year into the war. In late February, Ukraine's army shared this video of an intersection just outside Vuhledar. Kiev says it shows a Russian armored vehicle running over a landmine. The area, where at least 7 other vehicles appear to have been damaged, looks like what military experts call a choke point. As the video shows, Russian troops drove down a narrow route to the intersection, making them easy targets for mines and Ukrainian fire. Despite the obvious dangers, Russian tanks seem to roll onto the same trap again and again, as we see in another video released a week later. Ukrainian soldiers on the front line say Russian forces kept making similar moves.
Вони намагаються тут щось штурмувати. Якщо, не знаю, дивлячись, скільки вони людей своїх кладуть за одну якусь посадку, і скільки це часу їх там займає, виходить, не виходить. Я не знаю, який в цьому сенс.
Military experts who watch these videos say this shows that Russian troops received orders from the top, and most likely didn't have the autonomy to adjust to the situation on the ground. And That is an extreme example of how Russia's military didn't adapt from the old command and control system from the Soviet era. Another issue the analysts pointed out is that it appears the area wasn't cleared of mines before the tanks moved forward. Soldiers would normally use smoke to cover themselves from enemy shells, but videos show it didn't happen here. Military analysts say one reason could be the poor training of recently mobilized Russian soldiers.
Vuhledar, captured in October 2024, represented another month-long siege of a settlement with a pre-war population of approximately 14,000. Russia spent 2 months capturing each Selidove and Kurakhove. None of these captures produced operational breakthroughs. The ISW noted that none of these captures proved operationally significant, as they did not enable threats to major Ukrainian defensive positions or lead to deep penetrations of Ukrainian lines. The pattern is consistent. Russian forces invest enormous resources to capture heavily damaged settlements, only to encounter the next line of Ukrainian defensive positions with similar characteristics. Based on Ukrainian military estimates, placing 2024 Russian casualties at 427,000, Russia suffered approximately 103 casualties per square kilometre gained. This figure demands careful interpretation. Ukrainian casualty estimates represent the upper range of available assessments and cannot be independently verified. However, even adjusting for potential overestimation, the casualty-to-territory ratio remains extraordinarily unfavourable for any military seeking sustainable territorial expansion. The daily casualty rate provides additional context for operational sustainability. Ukrainian Ministry of Defence reported Russian losses in 2024 averaged 1,180 per day, with the highest monthly losses coming in November at 45,720 and December at 48,670. December 2024 marks the fourth highest historical daily loss for Russia, averaging 1,585 personnel per day, even as territorial gains decelerated. At 2024 rates of advance, Russian forces would require just over 2 years to seize the remainder of Donetsk Oblast, and this calculation assumes several conditions unlikely to materialize. That all Russian advances remain confined to Donetsk, that Russia can seize large urban areas as easily as small villages and fields, and that Ukraine conducts no significant counterattacks. Each of these assumptions is dubious at best. The Ukrainian incursion into Russia's Kursk Oblast provides an illuminating contrast to Russian advances in Donbas. Ukrainian advances in Kursk peaked on August the 20th to the 21st, 2024, extending over some 1,320 square kilometers, achieved in approximately 2 weeks of offensive operations. This area had been reduced to 482 square kilometers by December the 30th, 2024, as Russia deployed over 50,000 troops to counter the Ukrainian operation. The Kursk operation demonstrates that rapid territorial gains remain tactically possible under specific conditions. Tactical surprise, exploitation of gaps in defensive preparation, and concentration of force at decisive points. Russian operations in Donbas possess none of these characteristics. Ukrainian forces have prepared layered defences over 2 years, maintained continuous ISR coverage, preventing tactical surprise, and benefit from interior lines, allowing rapid reinforcement of threatened sectors.
This is the Ukrainian attack on Kursk, the battle where Kiev flipped the script and, after more than 2 years holding off Russia's invasion, sent its troops marching into Russia. This is the Ukrainian plan. This is eastern Ukraine as it was a few months ago, in summer 2024. Kiev is here, the Russian border is here, and here are the areas occupied by Putin's armies at the time. Down here, Russia has succeeded in breaking Ukraine's defensive line in the east by capturing the fortress city of Avdiivka, and troops are now rushing towards Kurakhove, a key logistics hub which the Ukrainians want to keep hold of. At the same time, Russia has launched a surprise attack on Kharkiv, Ukraine's second largest city, forcing Ukraine to stretch its army thin to hold back both attacks. Overall, things are looking pretty desperate. It is in this context that Ukraine's top general, Oleksandr Syrsky, decides to mount his own cross-border attack from Sumy Oblast, located here, into Kursk Oblast, located here. Because this attack is still ongoing and shrouded in secrecy, there's a lot we don't know about his plan. But from what we've witnessed, we can deduce 5 main goals. First, it seems Syrsky intended to draw Russian forces away from these 2 other axes and into Russia to defend the homeland, breaking their momentum. Second, he intended to put pressure on Russian supply lines running through this area, again, slowing or perhaps reversing advances elsewhere. Third, he wanted to show his allies that red lines about using Western kit inside Russia were meaningless, and Putin wouldn't do anything in response. Fourth, he intended to seize and hold territory which could be traded back to Russia in any future peace negotiations. Fifth and finally, it seems Syrsky wanted to bolster the spirit of both the Ukrainians and the West for continuing the war. This is the battle where Ukraine finally managed to make all its Western training and equipment work together, punishing Putin and forcing him to turn to North Korea for help. This is the battle for Kursk, and this is Battleboard. This is the border region between Ukraine's Sumy Oblast and Russia's Kursk Oblast. The city of Sumy is located here, and the city of Kursk is located just off the map over here. This moment, Ukrainian troops are on their side of the border, and Russia's troops are in their territory. There are 2 Russian defensive lines here and here. But all of that is about to change. Preparations for the attack begin in July in the deepest of secrecy. Until the very last minute, Syrsky communicates only with a handful of trusted generals and President Zelensky. Even the US is kept in the dark. What we do know is that the Ukrainian army begins gathering intelligence on Russian positions along this border, likely using drones and satellites and possibly physical scouts. The missions soon identify a weak spot in the Russian lines right here, around the town of Sudza. Exactly what weaknesses they identify is a mystery. But they probably noticed this line is being defended by just a few thousand inexperienced conscripts, border guards, and the Akhmat battalion. Chechen fighters known as TikTok warriors for their prowess on social media rather than in battle. The Ukrainians may also have spotted gaps in border defences like minefields and trenches. Perhaps geography plays a part. This area is broken up by rivers, meaning it is difficult for the Russians to move men and equipment around. Whatever his reasoning, once Syrsky has chosen his target, his next move is to build up an invasion force without anyone suspecting what he is up to, including the troops themselves. To do this, his generals begin briefing Ukrainian journalists that they are expecting a Russian assault from Kursk into Sumy. This creates a justification for moving elite troops into the area on the pretense of defending it. Syrsky's ruse works even on the Russians, who surely know they're not planning any such attack, but turn a blind eye to the troop build-up nonetheless. After all, why stop your opponent from making a mistake?
Quick update, everyone. I've just enabled channel memberships. If you want to support the channel directly, you can now join for as little as only 1 tier at 99p a month. Just click the join button below to see the perks. Back to the video. The Russian offensive in December 2025 continues along multiple axes across the Donbas region, concentrated primarily in Donetsk Oblast. The operational pattern established throughout 2024 persists. Russian forces conduct systematic frontal assaults against Ukrainian defensive positions, accepting heavy casualties to achieve incremental gains measured in hundreds of meters. The battle space has fundamentally transformed since the chaotic, mobile warfare of spring 2022. Both sides have established sophisticated defensive networks, featuring extensive trench systems, layered minefields, anti-tank obstacles, and pre-registered artillery targeting zones. Both sides possess detailed knowledge of terrain features, likely avenues of approach, and optimal defensive positions. The critical asymmetry lies not in understanding the battle space, but in the capability to integrate modern technology with doctrinal flexibility. Ukrainian forces have successfully adapted defensive doctrine to leverage Western training methodologies, precision strike capabilities, and ubiquitous drone surveillance. Russian forces continue executing operational approaches recognizable from Soviet military practice: massed artillery preparation, frontal mechanized assault, acceptance of heavy casualties, and incremental territorial advance. The doctrinal rigidity, combined with institutional degradation, limiting tactical flexibility, produces the catastrophic casualty ratios that characterize current operations. Russian offensive operations in December 2025 follow predictable patterns that Ukrainian forces have learned to exploit. Russian artillery conducts preparatory bombardment for hours or days, attempting to suppress Ukrainian defensive positions and degrade fortifications. This preparatory fire, while substantial, rarely achieves decisive effects against Ukrainian forces, employing depth defense with multiple fallback positions. Following artillery preparation, Russian mechanized infantry advances towards Ukrainian position. The composition of these assault forces reveals critical equipment shortages. While Russian forces continue employing armoured personnel carriers where available, numerous documented instances show troops transported in unarmoured vehicles, civilian trucks, and improvised transport. This improvisation reflects both equipment attrition and the challenge of sustaining armoured vehicle availability under continuous combat operations. Ukrainian defensive responses exploit multiple overlapping capabilities. FPV drones provide persistent surveillance from the moment Russian forces leave staging areas, tracking movements and identifying concentrations. Ukrainian artillery coordinates fire missions based on drone reconnaissance, striking vehicle columns and troop concentrations. Anti-tank guided missile teams engage armoured vehicles that survive initial artillery strikes. The integration of these capabilities creates kill zones where Russian forces suffer casualties before reaching Ukrainian defensive lines. Artillery fire, including rocket artillery systems, accounts for approximately 70 to 80% of all casualties on both sides, but FPV drones have become the second most lethal weapons system. Open source military analysis estimate that drones now account for a substantial portion of remaining casualties, with the proportion continuing to increase as both sides scale drone production and employment. When Russian forces reach Ukrainian trenches, those who survive the approach face close combat against defenders in prepared positions with clear fields of fire. Pattern documented throughout 2024 continues. Most assaults collapse within the kill zone, producing minimal territorial gain. The following day, Russian commanders order renewed assaults against the same objectives, employing the same tactical approach, achieving the same results. The persistence of demonstrably ineffective tactical approaches requires explanation. Russian forces continue frontal assault doctrine, not from ignorance of alternatives, but from institutional inability to implement more sophisticated operational concepts. Combined arms operations, integrating infantry, armour, artillery, engineers, air support, and electronic warfare in synchronized maneuver, requiring extensive training, competent small unit leadership, reliable communication networks, and flexible command structures capable of adapting to battlefield conditions. Russia's military no longer possesses these capabilities at the scale necessary for sustained defensive operations across multiple axes. What remains is an institution capable of executing simple, linear operations: artillery bombardment, mechanized advance, casualty acceptance, incremental gain. This represents not tactical preference, but institutional limitation. The only operational approach that Russia's degraded command structure can consistently implement. Ukrainian forces, by contrast, have progressively adapted doctrine throughout the conflict. Trained by NATO partners in combined arms principles, Ukrainian units employ distributed operations, small unit initiative, precision targeting of Russian logistics, and systematic integration of commercial and military drones. The result is force multiplication, allowing Ukrainian defenders to inflict disproportionate casualties while conserving combat power. The tactical asymmetry manifests most clearly in casualty ratios. While precise figures remain disputed, and vary by operational context, the pattern is consistent. Russian offensive operations against prepared Ukrainian defences produce casualty ratios substantially favouring Ukrainian forces. During periods of intense Russian assault, ratios of 5-to-1 or higher frequently appear in open source assessments, although these compress during Ukrainian offensive operations or when Ukraine forces lack artillery ammunition to conduct effective defensive fires. In part 2 I'll go over some distances, some numbers, some bodies covered for you. We'll also examine the political trap that locks both sides into this grind. We'll break down Russia's real strategy, betting that Western democracies will grow tired of funding this war. We'll expose Russia's own critical vulnerabilities, the logistical failures and institutional erosion that's hollowing out the Land of Shadows military. We'll also explain why Russia is now trapped in a strategic dead end where every option, continue, freeze or escalate, leads to failure. This is how wars are lost, not through dramatic collapse, but through grinding, irreversible degradation in pursuit of objectives that cannot be achieved. Part 2 answers the only question that matters. How does this end? Thank you all for watching. Hope you all have a lovely Christmas. Slava Ukraini. Herium Slava.